Okay, first thing I want to do is set up this section of notes. So this is the back of your last microbiology notes. It's our eukaryotic cells, so we're going to get to talking about the bigger cells. The rest of the cells. We've talked about prokaryotes that don't have a nucleus, so now we're going to talk about the rest of the cells, and they do have a nucleus. But I want to set up this page at the bottom. This is relative sizes chart. You're just going to like take this little piece of paper and fold it, kind of measure it out, lay it out, fold it so that it fits inside. I'm going to fold mine twice so that it fits inside that little space. You have to uncover the hole for the paper. And then I'm just going to glue that down right there. And we'll get to that in just a second. So get that done. And then the next page, history of cells. We're going to take this, history of cell theory. I'm going to put a little tiny bead of glue across the top. And put that right there above that, the cell theory states. Okay, so get those two things done. And then pause the video, get those two things done, and then restart the video. Okay, so eukaryotic cells, some words that, word parts that you need to make sure you know. Y'all were coming up on the STAR test, and you have to know these words. That's why I save this information. It works out, and then I save it for right now because it is extremely important for you to know for the STAR test and just to understand biology. So whenever you see EU, which we pronounce U, it means true. And this cut off my page, but we can fit that right there. Ugh, that's terrible. Let me zoom in a little bit. So U means true. We talked about eubacteria in the last section, and that meant the true bacteria, the ones that were on us or whatever. Well, U just means true. Karyote means nucleus. So anytime a cell has a nucleus, it fits into the eukaryotic division. We can take every single cell on Earth that we know of and divide them into two main groups: prokaryote, before the nucleus, or eukaryote, that has a true nucleus. So now we're talking about all the cells that have a nucleus. So when we use the word cell, they are the smallest, most basic life forms. They're the smallest, most basic living things. Bacteria are the smallest of the cells. Those are always single-celled organisms. If it's one cell big, the whole organism is one cell big, they are unicellular, because uni or uni means one. And then if they're just a single piece of a large, complicated organism that has tissues and organs and stuff like you do, we say those are multicellular. Because, I'll stick that right there, because multi means many, okay? So I love this picture for, if you think about what you are, there's a picture like this down in the elementary school, if you remember. It's a picture, from a distance it looks like a picture of the school, but if you get up close, you see all the kids' faces, and they're all in the picture making up. So here it looks like a man's face, but if you zoom in and look at it real closely, it's pictures of different people. So it's different pictures that are creating something that looks like one thing. And that's what you are. You look like one living thing, but really you are made of 100, about, and you know, we're different if you're different sizes. Your cells aren't different sizes. They're the same size. You just have more or less cells than somebody else that's a different size from you. So we're made of an average of about 100 trillion cells, all working together to keep you alive and to keep you looking like one living thing. But you're actually about 100 trillion living things all working together. So that's kind of cool to think about it. This is like you. You know, far away you look like one thing, but up close you're about 100 trillion different little living things. So cells are all living Okay, so all cells are living things. They adapt to their environment. They reproduce without a host, and they grow. They are specifically shaped for their function, and they have specific jobs. So when we study cells, we're going to look at, I'll just show you real quick. We're going to look at this, and we're going to say this is a generic animal cell, a generic plant cell. This is a generic bacterial cell. This is in the wrong section, but I'm going to talk about that when I get there. These are like generic fungi and protists. So these are generic ones. We're going to say this is an animal cell. Y'all, I've looked at, I can't even tell you how many different microscopes of cells. Never have I ever seen a cell that looks like this. It's just a good representation of all the things kind of that can be in an animal cell. This is a better representation of what your cells can look like. And they are shaped for their job. They are shaped differently, but they all came from stem cells. So what happens is during development of the embryo, cells start to differentiate. So cell differentiation just means, and you need to understand what this means, that we started off as a generic cell that just had your 46 chromosomes that were yours and they were unique to you. Somewhere during development, those cells started to turn into muscle cells. And then some of them would start, as they went through mitosis, they would become intestinal cells. Some of them would become liver cells. Some would become heart cells. Some would become nerve cells. Some would become, so you have about, in the human body, you have about 200 different types of cells. Let's just write that in here. Humans have about 200 different types of cells. Okay, so but they all came from that one fertilized egg that had your unique, DNA combination in there, and then they started to differentiate early on in your development. And then this right here, they come in all different shapes and sizes. This is a just kind of a size chart. I'm a visual person, so I'm going to do the best I can at making this make sense. So the biggest part of this chart is over here. This is 1 centimeter, and y'all, well, my camera is kind of in my way, but let me see if I can get that angle right here. This is my thumb nail, or this is my thumb, and this is 1 centimeter. Okay, so let me pick up my camera for just a second. So just so you can see how big we're talking, this is truly 1 centimeter. Okay, if we're measuring this. So that's how big 1 centimeter is. Okay, so when we are talking about a plant cell, which is a large cell, we have to go down to 100. We're at centimeter here. We have to go -6 places to be smaller. So here's 1 centimeter. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, this is that much smaller than this centimeter. Okay, so we're like way down here somewhere. We are very, very small. We can't see these. This is too small. And then when we get down to animal cells, those are 10 times smaller than a largest animal cell is 10 times smaller than a normal size like plant cell. We get back down to bacteria, those are 10 times smaller than an average animal cell. Y'all, we get down to viruses, we've moved down to a -9. So these are in the cells. This is, we have to add 3. Well, that's 6, 7, 8, 9. We have to add 3 more zeros to be talking about virus sizes. So we are talking about extremely small. A centimeter is small anyway. Now we're getting this many times smaller than a centimeter just to be talking about cellular stuff. Okay, so these are extremely tiny things, but they all have a job. They're alive and they have different shapes to them based on what their function is. They are shaped for a function. Muscle cells are shaped to, to pull in. Blood cells are shaped to go through vessels. Nerve cells are shaped to reach out and get sensory information. So we have all different, these right here, these intestinal cells, they are shaped to absorb nutrients. So everything is shaped, all these cells are shaped so that they can function properly. Okay? So let's talk about the history of cells, y'all. Before we had technology to view cells under microscopes, we had, we didn't know they existed. So there used to be a theory of spontaneous called spontaneous generation, where what's spontaneous? Like if you're a spontaneous person, you just, anything out of nowhere, you're just like spontaneous, you'll do it, whatever. Generation is talking about like generations, living things coming from, ancestry basically. So this is talking about like life just coming out of nowhere. So where life arises from non-living things. My pen is not doing well this morning. And y'all, I mean, this kind of, they didn't have any other kind of explanation. They leave out meat, leave meat out. And I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years ago. They leave out meat and, suddenly there's flies coming off of the meat. Or you have a broth or something like that, or water, and then a couple of days later you've got algae growing in there. So they didn't have an explanation. They didn't know that there were cells, yeast, bacteria, all different types of things flying through the air on our hands. Right now my hands have bacteria on there. There's no telling what's on here. But if we stuck them to a petri dish and then let that thing grow, something would come up, something would grow. Can't see it now, but they would colonize. So they had no other explanation. So early on, it was called spontaneous generation. They knew, that life happened. Obviously, they were alive and they saw birth and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't know how. They actually believed that men carried around little bitty tiny people, and they had to get those people into a woman to make them grow. They knew that, sexual reproduction with animals, humans, didn't know that was happening with plants at the time, but they knew about that. They knew that, sex, the act of sex led to pregnancies, but they didn't know how. They couldn't see the cells. So we've had some, hundreds of years ago, had some guys who really made a difference in the cell theory. Okay, so the history of the cell theory is very important. There's a couple of big people here. Robert Hooke, he was a monk who was the first to name cells a cell. And if you think about that word, a prison cell or something like that, it's just an empty, blocky room. Well, he was looking at cork, and this is not the best view, but you can always Google that if you're interested in seeing what this picture actually looks like. Cork is the bark of a tree. And so plant cells have cell walls. We looked at some plant cells under the microscope with mitosis. They have cell walls, so they're very blocky. And so when he looked under very early microscopes where you couldn't see a whole lot, he saw empty rooms. Well, he was a monk, and so monks live in monasteries, and they have empty rooms that they call cells. Very much like if you think about a prison, where it's just like line after line of empty, blocky rooms. And so he named himself because it reminded him of the empty rooms in the monastery. So he named them cells. Now we have better microscopes because of this guy down here. But we have better microscopes, so now we know that they're not empty. Okay, but he couldn't see any more. But he is the one who said, "Hey, this is what's making up this plant," and so we're going to call them cells. I hate to even say these guys' names because I know I'm saying them wrong. Lazzaro Spallanzani, that's the Texas way of saying that, proved that organisms come from other organisms. He disproved spontaneous generation. Okay, he said, you know what? Life is not just coming out of nowhere. they're coming from something that was previously living. So that was a huge thing, because then that got rid of saying, hey, you know what, that fly just appeared out of, out of nothing. So that gave us the defining living and non-living. And two words that you have to know. If it's something that is or was ever living, it is biotic. Remember, bio means life. So if we're talking about you are biotic. If we are talking about the chicken that you're eating for supper, it is biotic. If we're talking about the salad that you're eating for supper, it is biotic. If we are talking about a dead deer, it is biotic. If it was never living, we add an A in front of that, because remember, a or an means not. So abiotic. If we're talking about the water that you're drinking, that's abiotic. It was never alive. A rock, temperature, wind, weather, all that kind of stuff, non-living, never living, never living. Dead or currently living, biotic, never living, abiotic. You know those two things. So he helped lead us to defining what is alive, saying that, you know what, this stuff does not just pop out of nowhere. And then Antony van Leeuwenhoek. He helped improve the light microscope in the 1800s. I mean, look, this is early 1800s. This is mid 1600s. So we had like 150-ish years here, gap between him saying, hey, I can see this stuff, and somebody going, hey, I bet there's more stuff in there. Let's get a better microscope. So he started getting us closer to the type of light microscopes that we have now, like the ones we use in school. Now we have microscopes that are electron scanning microscopes. They are much more advanced. This is where this is what this is talking about. So Antony van Leeuwenhoek led us to getting to be able to see this stuff. We could not see details in there until we got to electron microscope much later. Okay, so those are things that, as of right now, we will never have in a school. They're very expensive types of microscopes, but we have them and we can see what's going on. And then these two guys work together. They help decide, hey, you know what? And the way I remember these two guys, we have Schleiden and Schwann. And Schwann sounds like swan. He decided that, he determined, not decided, but he suggested and determined that, you know what, I study plants. Every single plant that I've ever studied contains these things that Robert Hooke calls cells. And by this point, we're almost 200 years later. That's just the term for these things, where they're called cells. So he says, every plant's made of cells. They're in every single plant that I've ever studied. Schwann, like I said, sounds like swan. He made the determination that all animal tissue that he had studied was made of cells. So we still weren't studying bacteria really at the moment, but they led us to the two big groups of life that we knew at the beginning and that we classified at the beginning, plants and animals. So these two guys led us to say, you know what? All these living things are made of cells, okay? So we have the cell theory. And a theory, remember, do not confuse a theory with a hypothesis or a guess. A theory is not a hypothesis and it is not a guess. A theory is something that has been, it's a group of statements that has been proven over and over and over again. But you cannot say that it absolutely will always happen a specific way, because just like the theory of evolution, we say, that if you actually read what the theory of evolution is saying, it's saying that living things adapt to better fit their environment, and those who are better adapted survive and pass on those traits. That is true. Do things always adapt and live through their environment? No, we have something called extinction. So just because it's a theory doesn't mean it's always going to happen that way. And it also leaves us open for more studies. But a theory is something that's been proven over and over again. A hypothesis is an educated guess. It is something based on, we have some education, but we're still making guesses about this and we need to test it out. So the cell theory states, and this is the three parts of the cell theory, all living things are made of cells. At least one. Bacteria are always just one cell. You are about 100 trillion of them. So all living things are made of cells. All cells come from before existing. From cells that existed before them. Okay? So all cells come from a pre-existing cell. And cells are the most basic. You're not going to get anything more basic than a cell and an org. Okay? Cells are the most basic forms of life. If you get more basic than a cell, you are not talking about living things. Viruses are more basic than cells. They are things, but they do not org. Remember, there's a huge difference between viruses and bacteria. Abiotic, biotic. Must be produced by a living cell. These things right here, they reproduce themselves through mitosis. So these don't adapt to any type of environment. These can. So there are things, don't say all things are made of cells because viruses are not, but these are cells are the most basic form of life. If you start talking about smaller things than that, which we will, and we have, then you are talking about things that do not live on their own. Okay? Okay, so we know that there are millions. By the time you take in all the different plant cells, fungus cells, bacterial cells, animal cells, we know there's millions of different types of cells throughout the world. And that they're not empty, like Hooke thought. They're made of a bunch of stuff. And that stuff is what does the jobs that keep those cells alive and able to do their jobs. So the cell parts that perform all of the different jobs that keep the cells alive are called organelles. Look, organ. You have organs. You are alive. Think about it like this. You're alive because you have organs that are functioning, right? Your cells in a microscopic level are functioning. But if we look at a big picture thing, your brain is telling you what I'm saying right now. Your ears are picking up the vibrations that are making your brain take in that signal and decide what I'm saying. Your eyes are organs that are allowing you to see what I'm writing. And your brain, again, is involved in picking that signal up and deciding what that looks like, okay? Your heart is pumping. That is an organ. Your skin, largest organ. Your skin is your largest organ. Your skin is doing all kinds of stuff, keeping stuff out, keeping stuff in, maintaining your temperature. It's got a big job, and it is your largest organ. So organs are different pieces of a living thing that do their individual jobs. Your skin and your heart and your brain are all organs, and they are not doing the same thing, but they're all working together to keep you alive. Organelles, L means tiny. Okay, organelles are the tiny organs of cells that are functioning to keep that cell, that one living thing, to keep it alive, and they're doing different things. The nucleus is not doing the same thing as the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is not doing the same thing as the Golgi apparatus, but they're all doing different things to keep that cell alive, and we're going to talk about those on pages 80 through 82 in the next video. Okay, so a little bit of just last like random stuff that I want to make sure that we have. We have two major types of cells: prokaryotes let's just say prokaryotic. I want to make sure that we see these words in different ways. And eukaryotic. And we've talked about, this was all eukaryotic stuff, kind of, we're just getting up. So remember that pro means before. Eu means true. And karyote is referring to nucleus. It means kernel. And in the cellularly, we say that it's talking about the nucleus. So prokaryotic, we already talked about microbiology. Prokaryotes, they're all the cells on Earth that we know of that have no nucleus. They are always unicellular. They're not protecting their DNA. They're not going to have an extremely long lifespan where they are going to be able to become a multicellular big organism. So they're always unicellular. There are two kingdoms of prokaryotes, archaeobacteria and eubacteria. Okay, the ancient bacteria and the true bacteria, the ones that live around us in like where we are. They are all, doesn't matter if it says they're always, prokaryotes are bacteria. Okay, they're the bacteria. So just put that together. This means that. This means that. Prokaryotes are bacteria, period. They happen to make up two different kingdoms. We'll talk about that later. But they are always bacteria, and they live everywhere. We're going to talk about biomes as well when we get to ecology. They live in every biome. They live in the tundra. They live in the rainforest. They live in the ocean. They live on you. They live absolutely everywhere. Okay? Prokaryotes. Eukaryotes have a nucleus and all the other stuff, the membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, chloroplasts, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, all that kind of good stuff. And we only have 6 kingdoms, archaeobacteria, eubacteria, and then the other 4 kingdoms are all eukaryotic. They are from closest to bacteria-like, protist or protista, fungi, we'll talk about these later, plantae, and then animalia. So these are all 6 of our kingdoms. These 4 are always eukaryotic. These 4 are always prokaryotic. And then eukaryotes are able, they don't always, we have plenty of, like most protista are unicellular. Lots of fungi are unicellular. But they can, because they have that nucleus protecting their DNA, they can build up into large, complex, multicellular organisms. Okay, they have that ability because they are eukaryotic. They have a true nucleus, okay?